Morning, folks. We'll give people a minute or two to hop on.
Good morning.
And I will call our final budget meeting of 2021 to order. Gracious good morning, one and all. I am going to turn things over quickly to our Chief Budget Officer, Ms. Houston. We are in the final day of our budget process for 2021. We have been working with the Mayor's Office and with colleagues, with departments, stakeholders, and our community members to comb through our city's budget as presented by the Mayor's Office and make recommendations for changes, adaptations. Obviously, when a budget gets presented to us in the early part of August, lots of things happen before December. In addition to the work that we're doing, numbers come in that are finalized, and we're able to true up, things that were unclear at the time that the budget was presented. And so usually around this time we have the technical changes and then also negotiated changes. And so Ms. Houston will walk through what those technical and negotiated changes are in advance of our meeting today at 3:30. This is a good time to ask questions. If you have questions about them, of course, you can ask questions at the meeting as well, but I think we just wanted to give people an opportunity to have one last look at where we've been and where we are landing. And so I will turn things over to Ms. Houston to walk us through the 2021 budget V2.
Thank you, Council President Brendmoen. Good morning, Council members. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. All right. And you're seeing, Or you're seeing my note, or are you seeing just the one slide?
Yep.
Okay, sorry, I didn't. Here we go. We're at the beginning now. Okay. Today is December 8th, and so as
I
Councilor
just,
Moan
Miss
said,
Houston, I just have to like this is for the old timers in here, but do you remember ever in elementary school or junior high or high school when they would play a movie backwards and it would like you would just go crazy laughing because it was so weird to see a movie backwards? That's what just happened. Holly played her
yep,
presentation for us.
I previewed it for you really quickly. Okay, so today I will briefly just touch on the budget process, which you're all very well familiar with, but this is also just if anybody's tuning in or watching this later. I'll review the City Council's budget priorities that were first established in the first half of the year, talk about the community engagement opportunities throughout the budget process, and then discuss the survey results and the adaptations to the budget that will be in front of you for a final vote this afternoon. So I won't spend too much time here. I think the key notes on the City Council's budget process is at the beginning of each year, the City Council really identifies different policy issues or budget issues that they want to study further that may have implications or a recommendation for further investment in the up and coming budget that the mayor proposes. So we share those priorities with the mayor in advance of the proposed budget. And then the mayor proposes his budget in August, and then we've really spent the last few months reviewing all the details of the proposed budget. We've talked to all the departments and gotten more information on the proposed budget, and that has brought us to some changes and then the adoption vote this evening. So prior to the mayor's proposed budget, we shared these priorities with the administration. The council wanted a modest budget increase, wanted to refund or reform the programs impacted by the pandemic. And I'll get into what the details of the proposed budget include, but I just wanted to highlight that I didn't highlight it on the slides coming up, that the proposed budget does restore library and parks program funding that was lost due to the pandemic. So that item was accomplished. Sustainable complete streets and infrastructure plan. I'll talk about that later, as well as affordable housing and stable neighborhoods. Neighborhood safety and gun violence prevention was a priority, as well as responsible fiscal policy and building community wealth. So as I mentioned, this year we had a few engagement opportunities. So this was the second year of having a budget survey online. Last year we had about 180 responses, and this year we had 304 responses. So really getting the word out and had more engagement, and so that's awesome. I think the budget survey, we continue to improve each year, and so this year we were able to create a survey that had some graphs and images that I can share with you in a few minutes. We also had a community public hearing at Como Lake Pavilion on October 13th. And we had a good, very good showing and engagement in that event. And then we had 12 budget committee meetings, and those are always live at 10 a.m. or they're recorded so people can access them later. And all the materials of the presentations and things that the departments prepare for the council are attached to those agendas for access. And then finally, last week we held the budget and levy public hearing. That is the state mandate truth in taxation law that people, once they've received their estimated property tax statements, can come and share their thoughts with the council. So the first question, how important do you think the following programs or services are to the community? This list could have been much longer. It's long enough, but the three top things that people found extremely important were fire and medical services, public safety, and gun violence. And then The next question, so this is question 3 on the survey. There was also some opportunities for people to provide text responses, and that has been sent to council members and is also attached to today's agenda. As you think about the 2022 budget, how do you prioritize funding for the programs or services listed in the question above? And so the items that fleshed out here are similar. Increase funding for gun violence, public safety, and mental health support. We also asked how would people prefer to balance the budget? As we know, it's very challenging if we want to provide a new service, we have to take that service from somewhere else or increase funding. And once the maximum levy is set, that's not an option. So to balance a budget, sometimes you have to make trade-offs or tough decisions or increase fees. And so what people selected here, the top 2, were increase user fees and increase process efficiencies is what they would choose to balance the budget. And then finally, we did have a question about the American Rescue Plan funding, the $166 million that the federal government awarded to the city. And so there are certain parameters that funding can be used for. And so we listed them at a very high level. And so the top 3 priorities that flushed out of this question were neighborhood safety, housing, and infrastructure. And then last week I previewed these results, and Councilmember Tao had requested where are the responses coming from. And so on this slide, you can see there's a map of the city by zip code, and then the bar chart shows you by what percentage each zip code answered. And so this was an optional question. So of the 307, 221 selected their zip code and shared that information with us. And so that is what is on the bar chart or the pie chart. Is there any questions there? Okay.
I would just point out that when you're looking at the pie chart, the colors on the map don't coincide with the colors on the pie chart. So you got to take a little bit longer to take a peek at it to discern where different areas are. And it sounds like about a little bit less than half of the people participated in that question.
A little more than half, Council President.
More than half.
Yep. Right. But that is true. That would have been, I should have color coordinated it.
Oh, no,
next time. Thank you.
That is not a critique. It's not a critique.
No.
I was trying to match.
Good idea.
I was trying to match and I was like, oh, I can't.
Okay.
Mr. Tao has a hand up. Mr. Tao, you may be muted.
Thank you, Council President. Ms. Houston, thank you for this presentation and this graph, and I'm really grateful. It looks like we are our survey. It's like you said, it's reaching more people, and it shows that in my neighborhood, 1155104, it's 18%, and we still got a little bit of work left to do on the other zip code, but I really want to make sure that folks who are in a disadvantaged community has an opportunity to participate in our government and our budget process. And so great job on the survey, and this really helps. So I want to acknowledge your work and your team and on this.
Thank you, Councilmember Tao. I will transition now into so within that text, I read all the comments and drew out some themes, and then also wanted to just connect that to based on the comments that we heard, what's actually in the what is actually in the 2022 budget for adoption this afternoon. And so many comments were, so the blue on the left-hand side are the comments we heard, and the yellow are the actions or the investments that are made in the 2022 budget. So lower taxes. And so the property tax levy will be 6.17% versus the proposed and the maximum levy, which was set at 6.92%. That is a reduction of 0.75% or approximately $1.2 million. We also, there's many comments about streets and infrastructure. And this year, the St. Paul Street Reconstruction Program has $15 million, as well as in the capital improvement budget, there's a new concept, a new funding model, which allows the city to start 3 large projects for the fire department, Station 7, the Hamlin Midway Midway Library, and then the North End Rec Center. So those large 3 projects will be getting funding. There's also many comments about policing and making sure there's staffing. There's also equal comments about reducing funding for police. As always, there's a mix. In this year's 2022 budget, there will be a semi-annual police academy, so academies twice a year. Right now, the current model, we have one academy at the end of the year, and it creates big shifts between how many staff are on the force at one time. And so we have, it's like mountaintops. And so we're hoping that with having the opportunity to have 2 police academies, that the large shifts will start to even out a little bit. So this allows us to continually have some inflow into the police department, so we're not getting down 65 officers. This isn't increasing the sworn strength or anything like that. It's just simply a hiring model practice shift. There is some additional cost with hiring an academy, and so that additional funding will be in the budget. We're going to be putting that into a contingency fund, and the police department can access it if they need it. That it will be a 2-year pilot. The source of that will be American Rescue Plan funding. It's really important to track American Rescue Plan funding. And so by putting it in contingency and not just directly into the police budget, we'll have that opportunity to make sure that we're following correct best practices. And then there's also permanent funding for the Law Enforcement Career Path Academy. That is a wonderful program to get people into the academy. And then any questions, or are we good? Okay. The Neighborhood Investment Fund. So establishing a $1.6 million neighborhood development fund for local support, this will be a fund for local support for small business economic development. This will be it's really kind of a refresh on year-round STAR and what we used to know as Commercial Vitality Fund. And so it's taking neighborhood STAR funding that used to be for year-round STAR and economic development funding out of the STAR fund and creating a new neighborhood development fund. The projects will go through the STAR board for review, and but the wards will have will be able to have input and funding for them. Does that make sense? So each ward will have funding that they can allot and work with the Planning and Economic Development Department to invest. And then there's also funding for graffiti, plywood, and abatement. So those are different neighborhood investments that are within the budget, and just a few. There's many, but those are highlighted here. There's also comments about forestry and trimming cycles. And this year's budget created concentrated investments to remedy the emerald ash borer trees and reestablish a trimming cycle. So it's allowing the forestry department to not just focus on emerald ash borer, but also to focus on all the other trees that maybe they didn't have the funding to invest in the previous years. For housing, affordable housing, there will be in the future affordable housing for 30% AMI that will be coming before council. It's a large investment through the American Rescue Plan. And then there's also many concerns about safety. And so this year's 2022 budget includes the Office of Neighborhood Safety, continued investments in community first public safety. This is year 3 of those initiatives, and then enhanced pedestrian and traffic calming safety. So that leads to next steps. So today at the HRA meeting at 2 p.m., the HRA budget will be voted on. Then at 3:30, there will be a series of budget votes, starting with setting fees, the water board, the river center, the library board, the HRA, and then finally the levy and the budget. As Councilmember Brandmon said, there will be the council's changes included in the budget amendment, as well as technical changes. Things that are technical changes include carryovers of grants that weren't fully spent in this year. So it's carrying the budget forward in 2022. So the department has the authority to spend the funding. Sometimes there's corrections that need to be made that were just missed in the original budget process or flushed out with more information that we've received. And so there's different types of things like that. Is there any questions I can answer or go through in more detail?
Doesn't look like there's specific questions. I think I feel like we say this every year, but by the time we get to this point, we've like looked over each of the departments with a fine tooth comb, and when you're like, are there any questions on this $660 million budget? And we sort of look blankly. It is not. I think it's a bit of fatigue because we've really taken our side of the role of the council's management of the budget very seriously and done our due diligence here. So I'm certain that there are questions, but I just want to acknowledge the work that it has taken us to get to this point, week after week after week, with the different departments, and then with our colleagues, with our stakeholders, with community members, really trying to come up with the best proposal given information that has come up over the course of the year, and our priorities as well, making sure that our priorities are reflected well in the budget. So, and I still haven't seen any hands go up. So Ms. Naker and then Ms. Prince.
Thanks, Council President. I'm trying to decide what I want to say now versus what I'd like to say more when we actually adopt the budget this afternoon. But I think just for now, I want to thank Ms. Houston, first of all, so much for your hard work.
Budget meeting. God, I'm really good.
I think you might not be on mute, Council President.
I'm sorry. There's people popping by to sign a letter.
Oh.
So I will.
Sorry. So Ms. Houston, thank you so much for your work on this. I know this has been quite a process in a hard year. And I also want to thank my colleagues. I mean, I think one of the things that we did really well this year that I hope we can continue to do is to ask really hard questions of each of our departments, not only about what they're hoping to receive and do in the year ahead, but also about what they've done in the year that's just passed. I think it's really easy for us to focus on next year's budget and kind of overlook the accountability for what's happened with the dollars we've already allocated. And in this case, I think we were able to find dollars that were not being spent, and I don't think it's fair to ask people to continue to pay in when funds are sitting there not being fully spent down. And I think we were able to use some of those dollars to help bring down the levy and use them more efficiently. So that's one thing I think we did really well. And I also think just being able to keep in mind how dollars are actually going to be reflected in the neighborhoods we serve. So those additional investments we're making in traffic calming and pedestrian safety. I've been hearing so many concerns from my constituents about speeding and about pedestrian safety concerns. And also about graffiti removal and just some of the bread and butter basic maintenance needs that I think we can sometimes overlook when we're just looking at the big picture of millions of figures in a budget. So I think putting in specific line items for those kinds of services is really gonna show on the ground in the year ahead. So I'm proud of that work as well, and I'll say more this afternoon.
Thank you, Ms. Naker. And I don't know if this is the appropriate time to insert this kind of public service announcement, but as we, one of the other things that happens as we go through our budget is we identify areas where we'd like to dig in deeper in the coming year to have policy conversations, and that is what helps us frame our priorities for the budget. And I agree that we a lot of times end up. It's interesting where our focus swings during the course of the budget, but really the city manages so many of the basic day-to-day things that we come to expect in our city. And throughout COVID, there are things that have been languishing. There are things that I know that we had meant to dig deeper into, like some of our parking challenges, and that they have taken a back burner, obviously, as the pandemic has continued to drag on and the crisis that it has caused has increased. And really looking forward to going back into some of those policy conversations that can help us address some of the things that have languished over the past few years as well. So that is the other piece of the budget that we probably doesn't come to the forefront when we talk about this, is not only are we setting the 2022 budget, but we're identifying our policy conversations for 2022 as well. Ms. Prince.
I would also like to thank Ms. Houston and also the members of the leadership team, Councilmember Tolbert Naker and Council President Brenmoen. I think I feel really good about the fact that we are able to lower the levy from the maximum that we set in September. I do want to bring up one small issue, and I am hoping that maybe Ms. Houston could look into this. I know it's last minute, but when we had the presentation from Chief Inks on the CARE program, that was going to be matching, we were going to be matching a 2-year grant from the POLAD Foundation. The grant was $300,000 a year. We had thought that it was $600,000 for this year. And we did get a clarification from the deputy mayor that indeed the match was over 2 years, which to me suggests that there may be $300,000 that we could, if we were able to talk to the mayor's office today, to perhaps seek some reduction in that $600,000 to apply to our levy savings. So I know it's last minute. I know it would have to be basically a friendly amendment at this stage of the game, but I think there was some agreement on the part of the deputy mayor and about the fact that the $300,000 was the appropriate match for the POLAD grant over 2 years. So I'll just throw that out there. But meanwhile, I think we have a good workable budget. I think the council is well represented in the work that was done to arrive at a final budget. And I am really relieved that we are providing support for a second police academy, so we're not continuing to deal with the really steep attrition that isn't appropriate in a public safety department. So good work, everyone.
Thank you, Ms. Prince. Mr. Tao.
Thank you, Council President. Ms. Hawley, can you go over the contingency for the second academy and the police fund again? I just want to hear that again.
Yes, Council President Brenmoen, Councilmember Tao. The police funding for the second academy will be put into a contingency fund, which means if that contingency money is needed at the end of the year. So police every year has attrition. They have different salary costs depending on different events. And so it's a bit so they may be able to fund 2 academies within their existing budget and may not need that funding. Or if they need that funding, it's available and it would come back before council through a budget amendment to move it from contingency to the police department.
But that fund is dedicated and it can be used for like public work or something else, right?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you, Ms.
We're
Houston.
carving it out. We're carving it out right now.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Prince.
I share Mr. Tao's concern here. My concern about it is that we know that the mayor's proposed 2022 budget included 1.8 million for attrition. And that is exactly what we're trying to avoid, that the department has to reach 1.8 million in savings before it can hold another academy. So I want to be clear that for the second half of the year, I mean, I'm assuming that the first academy will be in the first half of the year. And in the second half of the year, that we're not still requiring the department to reach 1.8 million in attrition before it can hold that second academy. So I want to be very clear that that is in the police budget to be used for a second academy, basically eliminating that need for the 1.8 million in attrition. Can you address that?
Council President Brenmo, Councilmember Prince, I will do my best. So the attrition, is still in the budget. There is also additional funding for a second academy. It is up to the department to manage their budget, and I believe there has been different processes that we've learned about through the budget process on how different departments hire. And so I believe this comes down to more of a departmental policy administration question, not necessarily yes or no from HR, but I could be wrong. If OFS wants to chime in, otherwise I can follow up as well, if that's not sufficient.
I'm concerned about that because we are putting, as I understand it, 1.2 or 3 million in for that second academy and staffing to be able to maintain our numbers. So I'm really uncomfortable if we're not deliberate about saying this replaces the need for that 1.8 million in attrition savings. I mean, if it's, you know, at least 1.2 or whatever the number is that we're putting in, should be eliminating that need for attrition savings. And we really need to get that. That needs to be understood going into 2022. So I hope we can resolve that before this afternoon.
Thank you, Ms. Prince. Rebecca, was this on the attrition topic? Rebecca, Ms. Thinker.
Thanks, Council President. I just want to thank Councilmember Prince and Councilmember Tao for those questions. And for myself, I think that putting money in contingency is a really good governance practice to require departments, no matter which department it is, to demonstrate the need for funding before the funding is allocated. But by doing that, I by no means want to make it more difficult for the police department to hold a second academy whenever they deem it's necessary. And so I'm agreeing 100% with the questions you're asking. And I guess my assumption had been that at whatever point in the year the police department feels it needs a second academy, and that will likely, I would imagine, be earlier in the year because currently they hold their academy at the end of the year, right? So they'd be coming to us sometime in the first half of the year to ask for that second academy. I do want to make sure that there's nothing about putting the money in contingency rather than just budgeting the money into the department that would make it more difficult for them to do that. And so I think I'm just reiterating what you're saying, Councilmember Prince, and I would like to have some assurance of that perhaps from Mr. McCarthy now or anyone else before we vote this afternoon.
Council President Brenmo and Councilmember Naker, right. I think that your characterization, Councilmember Naker, is correct that we would hold this in contingency. There is still attrition in the police department budget, as there is in almost every other department budget in the city. The goal of putting this additional funding which is on top of the 1.7 million that was already added in the proposed budget to chip away at the police department's attrition, is to be able to hold 2 academies to smooth out, as Ms. Houston noted, the hiring peaks and valleys within the department, but it does not completely erase the attrition that's savings that are incorporated into the department budget, but it would be held in contingency until we can determine that we have a staffing plan that works for the police department, the council, and everyone else who's the stakeholders who are involved in this analysis. That's my understanding of the council's proposal as it sits today.
Just as a follow-up, Council President. So Mr. McCarthy, does that mean that if the police chief comes to us in April and says, I'd like to have a second academy, what maybe could you illustrate what's different about that scenario if these dollars are in contingency versus if they're just in the budget?
Council President Bremo and Councilmember Naker, it would require future council and mayoral action to move that funding out of contingency into a police salary account. So it would require a review of this council and the mayor's office to be able to approve that.
So it would be a vote by this body, but it would not, the attrition number would not have had to be met by that point.
The department would still need to meet their budget by the end of the year, even with this additional funding.
But in April, when we don't know that yet, there would be nothing preventing us from moving forward with an academy.
Council President Bremo and Councilmember Naker, I would still suggest that we do what we typically do with the police department, is to make sure that their projections incorporate where they think they will have vacancy savings between now and the end of the year, or between April and the end of the year, to make sure that they can land their budget within budget. So we'd need to do work to forecast retirements and turnover as we do currently to be able to make sure that they can land their budget.
Just really quickly, last one, is that different if it's in contingency versus if it's in the budget, or is that the process you would recommend regardless?
Council President Bremo and Councilmember Naker, that's the process that we would recommend regardless. It's just that it requires that additional review process from the council to approve that additional funding.
Thank
you. Ms. Prince?
John, this isn't making me feel better. You have budgeted 1.8 million in attrition. The council is adding, what's the amount, everybody? Is it 1.2? That we're
$1,135,000.
Okay, so at least we should be reducing that attrition requirement by 800,000, because that is our intention here, is not to require that the department reach 1.8 million in staff savings before it can hold a new academy.
And Council President Bremo and Councilmember Prince, I think this is where the confusion came at the police budget hearing, that we do not say that the department needs to realize $1.8 million in savings before they can have an academy. They need to forecast that throughout the year they will be able to achieve enough savings to stay on budget, just as every other department has to stay within their budget. And I would, so the plan right now, as I understand it, is there's an additional $1 million to assist the department to hire above what they were allowed to hire in the proposed budget. And the goal is to smooth out those peaks and valleys that Ms. Houston noted that currently exist by only having one academy a year. There still will be a requirement that the department stay within their budget, even with this additional $1 million. This should make it much easier for them to do that, because it's a lot of additional money than what they currently have. But they're right. They still have to meet their budget as every other department does.
Well, I'm less interested in keeping it in contingency. I'll just say that. I'm concerned about the responses. The goal here is to be able to maintain consistent staffing throughout the year. And my assumption is that if we're going to have 2 academies in a year, we're graduating one now, and that it would make sense for the police department to immediately hold a spring academy and then hold a second academy in the fall. And so my concern is that Spring Academy would be funded as one annual academy. And this would be adding a second fall academy. And I just want to be clear here that the contingency issue concerns me because I need to know that the mayor is committed to having a second academy to maintain our staffing levels. So I need to hear that, Mr. McCarthy, that the mayor is committed to 2 academies, likely spring and fall, and so that we can maintain staffing levels and that we don't have to face the deep attrition that we're facing right now when we're about 70 officers short of what we need and everybody's working too much overtime, and we've eliminated the problem property unit and the traffic enforcement unit. I need to hear a commitment from the administration that you're committed to 2 academies so we don't get in this bind again where our officers are exhausted and stressed and we are unable to fulfill our responsibility to the community on traffic enforcement and problem property enforcement.
Council President Brenmo and Councilmember Prince, the administration, including the mayor and myself, have been working through the details on these budget ads over the last several weeks. We agreed to this additional funding for the police department with the council specific request that it go towards 2 academies. I think what we discussed in those conversations was, as Ms. Houston noted, treating this as a pilot approach to work with the department to determine what the right level and number of academies are and kind of a new approach to what their staffing model has been. We've heard from this body repeatedly that the current approach doesn't fit your expectations, and I think that's what we wanted to do, is to look at what the right approach is for staffing the department moving forward. And this is as a pilot with 1 year of funding through temporary ARP resources so that we can look at what this approach looks like and if it actually achieves what our goals are set out to be. So the administration supports working through that this year with all of you and the department to make sure that we have, the ability to hire when we need to.
Thank you.
I do support this approach. I feel like it creates that accountability, and at the same time, I know that there is strong support for the second academy on this council. So I don't feel like it's a barrier in terms of if the need is there, we will be able to move forward, and I do fully support that. I think one of the things that's unique with our police and fire is years are different. Sometimes we have more protests. Sometimes we have federal trials in our downtown. Sometimes we have less. Sometimes we have more events and activities that we can't predict all those things in advance. And so I think just having kind of a more constant check-in does probably make sense. And I also, I feel like that accountability is beneficial on lots of levels. And to me, it doesn't mean that it is intended to be a barrier to having a second academy. Leveling out the staff over the course of the year is a priority I really think for everybody. No one wants to have a 70-person deficit and have people running themselves ragged. Having a more consistent staffing level is best for all of our departments. And so I'm there, and I can understand concerns, but I really do think that this is a good way to create that accountability and to give the council the opportunity to check in. I agree it's probably going to be a June conversation, not a December conversation, and it's going to be a projection. But just chiming in there. I see Ms. Jalali has a hand up.
Thanks. Just building on what Council President Brad Moen said, I'm personally much more comfortable with using this as something we meet out versus automatically handing it over. I think that is about oversight. I think that is about trying something different. And like every other thing we try that's different, our council asks for report backs. We ask for managerial evidence and review. And I think that that is even more appropriate with a department that's already as well resourced as SPPD. So I'm personally far more supportive of a contingency model that is a pilot and is trial, where we have more review and accountability power than one that is not. So I wanted to offer that thought as well.
Thank you. Other thoughts or questions on the budget V2, as I was calling it earlier, that Ms. Houston proposed or presented to us today? Okay, great. Mr. Lally.
I wanted to just bring up a point that is one of the reductions that this council made that I personally wasn't supportive of, but given that we're moving forward with it, I'd like to understand it better. It was my understanding we said we would defer the low-income homeowner program for a year, or that we would have the chance to revisit that. What is the plan exactly? If the argument being made is that, other levels of government have access to a similar funding program like this, how are we communicating with those partners and understanding what resources our constituents are getting, so that if we need to look at this as an option for families in need next year, not the year after next year, but next year, that we have the chance to do that? If someone could speak to that, that would be helpful.
Council President Brenmo, Council Member Jalali. Currently, Ramsey County is working on making sure that there's better communication about the homestead credit and the property tax relief program this year. Within the property tax estimates, my understanding is that there was a flyer talking about these programs included. They are also working on a legislative change of making that property tax relief program automatic so that people wouldn't have to apply. That takes a bit of a longer process, and as you mentioned, so over the next year we can definitely partner with them and follow the progress on that. And then in addition, I think I believe we would, on our list of things to talk about next year, we talked about having the Office of Financial Empowerment back. And I know that maybe there's different things that we could discuss with them about outreach and communicating, or, connecting people with these different resources as well. And that's something that we could do from a city internal approach first, as we continue to look at that and build it out.
Does Ramsey County know when they expect to be able to make that legislative change?
I can follow up, Councilmember Jalali, if that is on their agenda this year. I know they've been meeting with people in the legislature, so it could potentially be on their agenda this year, and then a potential change.
Okay, thanks.
Ms. Jalali, also thank you for that, for drawing attention to that. I think that we have our own legislative agenda, and we need to ensure that that is part of our legislative agenda as well. And I agree that a coordinated campaign with Ramsey County and likely Hennepin and Minneapolis and other, maybe the League of Minnesota Cities or Metro Cities, where you and I are both on the board, would be a great place to underscore that initiative, because ideally, anything where we are asking people to proactively sign up for refunds that are due to them is a bad program. These should be coming automatically. When Ramsey County said we were leaving $25 million on the table, I was shocked. And I knew it was bad, but I didn't know it was that bad. And that is money that is due to our community members. So I 100% agree and underscore that lift. I think that we need to be very coordinated, and I will follow up with you specifically about the Metro Cities and League of Minnesota Cities to ensure that that is part of our their ongoing agenda as well at the Capitol, because if we're united in that front, I think we'll be more successful than if Ramsey County is out there fighting for it on their own. And undoubtedly this, we know Ramsey County stats. I imagine that there are similar issues in Cook County and St. Louis County and Koochiching County. And, so let's band together and get the refunds that are due to us, because it's not right that they're left unclaimed because, no one asked for them, and when they're due to those community members. So I wholeheartedly agree. And we should be very specific about as we defer this program or delay it in anticipation of some changes on the county level, that we check back in about it. Ms. Prince.
Also to that point, I am on the board of the community action programs for Ramsey and Washington County. And Mr. Karcher Ramos and I met with Catherine Fair, who's the executive director of CAPRW, through the weatherization and heating assistance programs of CAPRW. We are in touch with virtually, well, 2 out of 3 people in poverty in the 2-county area that CAP serves are part of CAP programs. So we have an opportunity through the weatherization and heating assistance to be able to reach a lot of homeowners with this information as well. So we are talking about making that connection both for property tax relief and also for any number of other programs. I think it's going to be a really productive partnership.
Thank you. And I know that that particular program was wasn't as important to members of the council. And I think this delay gives us an opportunity to do a larger scale, meaningful change that, again, doesn't require proactive application from our community members, which, you know, if the money is left out there, we know it's hard. They're harder to reach community members as well. So automatic is ideal. Okay, other thoughts or questions, concerns, ideas about this version 2 of the budget as we wrap up here today, the end of our long budget season. The only note I wrote down was that the budget is important. We do a ton of work on this, and we have done this in, as I mentioned, in partnership with our community and stakeholders, the mayor's office, colleagues. When we are done passing the budget today, we're not done with our work. We are moving on to the ARP, the ARPA dollars that were given to us by the federal government, by President Biden. We have $166 million. And part of our, while we've been trying very diligently to separate ARPA requests from our budget, there are some one-time expenditures that are probably noted throughout this budget presentation that identify or that will be using ARPA funds, including a very large contribution of that money, $37.5 million, I believe is what we're circling around for closing that 30% gap in affordable housing and finishing projects that can serve people in that income level, which is far too prevalent here in St. Paul. And so that's a big bite of that, but there's plenty more resources and dollars there. And the council will be seeking to dig in on our own identified priorities for the ARPA dollars and in overlaying that with where the mayor has begun its work on the ARPA dollars. What I've heard council members say repeatedly is what we don't want to do is whittle away ARPA dollars $1 million at a time and then one morning wake up and realize we're out of ARPA dollars. So really identifying what buckets we're using and making sure that as we're making expenditures that we're aware of what expenditures we are offsetting and so in so doing. So our work will shift almost immediately to ARPA. And I think that we're in a good place for that in the terms of where we stand as a council, the priorities we've identified and the partnership that we have forged with the mayor's office. And I think right now our ask is we're ready to participate. We're ready to be involved in that process, and we're ready now. This budget is phase 1 of a very important financing opportunity for the city of St. Paul. So we're ready to go. So I know that we're separating these two things and been intentional about that, but they're inextricably connected in so many ways. And there's a great opportunity ahead of us. So our work here is coming to a close, but it is only just beginning. And we look forward to the next part of this with the ARPA funds. And I know that my colleagues have repeatedly said, we want in, we want to participate in this process, and we want to identify these priorities and make sure that we're managing these funds well. So looking around the horn, any other quick thoughts before we wrap up today? As I think I will save what I sometimes call a think-a-thon for this afternoon. I know that there's been so much work in front of the scenes and behind the scenes to get to where we are, and so we'll save that for later. Ms. Houston mentioned this at the beginning, but we will convene HRA, we'll convene library, we'll convene the council, all at 3:30. We are also expecting a report from the administration about rent stabilization and an update on the path that will be taking, given the ordinance that passed in last year's election. I don't know if everything will be decided and answered, but we did ask for an update, and we'll be getting that today at 3:30. So that will also be part of our conversation this afternoon. So that's a lot. It's a big day. So I appreciate everyone's work. And if there's nothing else to come before us this morning, we'll be adjourned. Thank you much.
Thanks.